Hello and welcome to Politics at Jack and Sam's Daily, the podcast that gives you nearly everything you need to know about British politics in less than 20 minutes.
It's Wednesday, October the 16th. My name is Sam Coates of Sky News, and with me is Jack Blanchard of Politico. And we're at that point in the year where we're recording this in the pitch black. There's a forecast of rain all day in Westminster. But we want to give you a bit of hope and excitement by microdosing you up with all the politics that you need today to put it all in perspective.
Sam was just telling me off air that people like it when we disagree. So I'm going to instantly disagree with Sam about the weather forecast. It is not going to rain all day. It is going to be warm and sunny. Look at the forecast, man. 21 degrees and sunny in Westminster this afternoon. I am going to boldly make a prediction and not even take my coat into work today. And if I get rained on, then you win. But I reckon it's going to be a lovely day.
That's quite a claim. Okay, well, we'll see who's right about the weather tomorrow, and let's see what else we're right about today. It's a weird one because there is a lot of big global and economic news around today. Look, America has issued its toughest ever warning to Israel to open up Gaza to more humanitarian aid or risk some kind of restrictions of the military assistance that they're given. We've got inflation this morning, which could drop below 2% for the first time since April 2021. But the other thing that we've disagreed on this morning is actually...
Apart from the weather,
is... what actually is today's top political story in Westminster? On the one hand, you've got the government under fire from all sides, and that's pretty much coming to a head, Prime Minister's questions. And that was your choice.
Yeah, exactly. But Sam, you want to talk about the backbench bill coming into the House of Commons today for the first time about assisted dying and legalising assisted dying. And being the nice gentleman I am, I'm going to go along with your suggestion. The only reason I think PMQs is a bigger story today is simply that it is going to be a very visual thing happening at midday with Keir Starmer under a lot of pressure about all the different issues we've been talking about all week. Whereas the assisted dying thing is kind of the bill arrives in the Commons and that's it today. But there is no doubt that this is the start of a process that looks like it could bring very, very seismic social change to this country. So I don't want to underplay the insignificance of assisted dying. I just feel like today is not the day it's going to dominate the discourse. But hell, you can have it, Sam. Let's let it dominate our discourse. Why don't you tell people why it really matters and we should be talking about this right now?
Quite possibly, Britain is about to embark on the biggest social change in at least 20 years. And that is legislation that will legalise assisted dying, which is going to be debated and voted on quite possibly in the next couple of months. And if you spend any time in Westminster at the moment, actually, after the budget, this is the subject that is dominating more conversations than anything else that I'm having. And today is it's a moment largely of symbolism, but today what's happening is that at 20-1, Kim Leadbeater, the Labour MP, who is going to be sort of the face of this debate and the face of changing the law to make it legal, make assisted dying legal in this country, will present her bill. Now, what that means is that we find out the title of the bill, we find out the names of the 12 co-sponsors of the bill. We don't get to see the bill, although we're getting the first indications of what it could see. But I think that actually this fires the starting gun on the debate about whether or not Britain wants to change the law to bring it in line with a host of countries that have done similar in order to allow people to end their life. And in this case, it will be if they are terminally ill and if two doctors agree. And then there is a process of what's called judicial oversight. We don't quite know what that amounts to yet, to make sure that the thing is safe and legal and that people don't feel pressured into taking this option. And this is causing... There is a lot of nervousness around this all over Westminster. People are conscious about the scale of the change that they are embarking on. And so actually, the conversations behind the scenes are the ones that matter at the moment. And I just want to start by highlighting one big thing that was coming up in my chats yesterday about this, which is everybody agrees that given the nature and the kind of fundamental importance of the change that's being proposed, which could well pass the House of Commons, I think campaigners in favour are broadly optimistic. There is widespread agreement that this cannot be rushed. But what I discovered yesterday is that the actual legislation will be debated and voted on November the 29th. We know that. That's the second reading bill. That's where MPs have to decide whether they're in favour of the principle of this massive, massive change, and their constituents will hold them to account on it. But they're only going to see this legislation probably about 2 weeks before then. We don't get it today. We don't get it for some time. But jarring up against this promise that none of this will be rushed, all MPs are going to have to make their mind up with barely 2 weeks of actually being able to see the fine print of this discussion. It's being treated as a great big binary issue, but actually the safeguards, the detail, the approach to the government around it is all very important and nuanced. And nevertheless, this all seems to be happening in the view of some kind of very fast.
The mechanics of this are really interesting. It's important to say this is not the government bringing this forward and saying that we should do this. It is a backbench bill, as you say, by a Labour MP. What's happened here is that Keir Starmer, in opposition, said he would give time to this. He is personally in favour of this, but it is not government policy, it is not Labour Party policy, but Keir Starmer supports the basic idea, and he said were a backbench bill to come forward, he would give it time in the House of Commons, no more than that. And so sure enough, every new parliament, a certain number of backbench MPs get the opportunity to put forward their own piece of legislation, and sure enough, the Prime Minister has indicated that this one, put forward by Kim Leadbeater, will be given time. It will be a free vote in the House of Commons, which means MPs will not be whipped on how to vote. It will be entirely up to their own conscience how they want to vote. And so it all comes down to how many MPs personally believe that this is the right thing to do. The last time Parliament voted on this issue, on a form of this issue, I think was 2015, and Parliament overwhelmingly rejected assisted dying. But of course, we have a very, very different looking Parliament now to the one we had in the 2010s. Lots and lots of new MPs, lots and lots of Labour MPs. And there is a sense that attitudes are shifting. Out in the country, there is overwhelming support for some form of assisted dying legislation. Overwhelming support. This is a hugely popular thing. There is an MRP poll, which is flagged in our playbook email this morning, that shows in every single constituency bar one, there is a majority support for assisted dying. So MPs who are wavering about this do know that back home in their constituencies, most people do support this in some form, although of course there is a sort of devil in the detail aspect of it. There are different forms of assisted dying, there are different frameworks you can introduce, and some MPs may be swayed either way depending on the detail, which, as you say, we haven't seen yet on this bill, and that may be a crucial factor in whether or not it passes. But the expectation is there are enough MPs now who support this, bolstered by the idea that people out in the country support it, that this change may indeed actually happen this time. And that will be a very significant moment for the country. It's worth saying, of course, though, that this would hardly put the UK at the forefront of this. Assisted dying has been happening in lots of other countries for years. I can reel off a few of them: Canada, Netherlands, Switzerland, Germany, US, Australia, lots and lots of countries. It's not every state in the US, but at least 10 or 11 of them. Belgium, lots of other countries are already doing this, and in some senses the UK is playing catch up.
One of the curiosities is that this is being done through a private member's bill. Now, when there were big social changes in Britain in the 60s, they were done through private members' bills. But as one slightly nervous member of the government said to me, times have changed. And so we do have the spectacle of Kim Leadbeater, who is a popular and incredibly well-respected Labour MP, sort of trying to hold the ring herself, going around talking to the different factions, trying to work out what the legislation is, kind of without the formal support of the government machine. And it didn't need to happen like that. You could have had a government bill that just wasn't whipped, for instance, because the complexities here are immense. So this bill that they're talking about only applies to England and Wales. There is separate assisted dying legislation, which is at a different, more advanced stage up in Scotland, that actually proposes to do slightly different things. From what I can tell from looking at the legislation, it would open the path for anyone over 16, not over 18, as Kim Leadbeater's legislation likes to say, from being able to exercise this option. The criteria under which you can use this option, what you have to show, is at the moment thought to be slightly different to what Kim Leadbeater is going to propose, although they might change the Scottish legislation in order to do this. And then aside from that, there is a whole question about how the government can make palliative care, end-of-life care more robust, so it doesn't feel like this becomes some kind of slippery slope, because the kind of provision for people's end-of-life care, which is largely in the charity sector as it is, and is not always incredibly well funded, where the state steps in, where we can ensure that people don't feel pressured to go down that route. These are very, very tricky issues that normally you would expect a government to kind of hold the pen on, because they're quite multidimensional and involve different nations and different public services. But here we have one MP with a sort of bunch of MP supporters trying to sort of navigate incredibly tricky territory. Even though the Prime Minister is in favour, he has been all over this issue right back to 2010, where he changed, as Director of Public Prosecutions, the guidelines around assisted suicide to make sure that there was individual discretion around whether or not people who helped their relatives end their lives were prosecuted, at a point where Gordon Brown, who was then Prime Minister, opposed all of this. But there is a split even at cabinet level over what to do. And a final thing to say about the politics of this: there are MPs who are very in favour of this. You've got MPs who are very hostile, but I am told by some whips that the vast majority of MPs are quite nervous about this, very contentious issue, and particularly new MPs do not relish the thought of being made to stick their head above the parapet so early on in the Parliament without any leadership from their parties, without any real leadership from the government, because the government is saying this is a free vote, and are worried about having to expose themselves to what could become quite an unpleasant set of arguments. So I know that the whips are worried about how this is going to play out and the impact, particularly on new MPs, because it isn't necessarily going to be that pretty.
I mean, just pass me the world's tiniest violin for the new MPs. Dare they having to make decisions and stand up and put their heads above the parapet? Well, guys, don't stand to be an MP then if you don't want to do that. It's kind of an important job where you have to take decisions for the good of the nation. I remember covering this issue when I was a Yorkshire Post journalist in the late noughties, 2010. There was a campaigner called Debbie Purdy in West Yorkshire who had multiple sclerosis, and she was the one that forced that change in the law back then when Keir Starmer was the DPP, and she made very powerful arguments about why the law needed to change, and I would imagine that the experiences Keir Starmer had then dealing with some of those people like Debbie at that time are what influenced his thinking on this, and why he's held the opinion ever since that this is a law that needs to change. I remember the campaigners saying to me at the time, the reason you would never get a government doing this, the reason this would never have been Labour Party policy going into the election, is that it's just too dangerous a thing for a political party to take on, because it is something that would lose you votes but would unlikely to gain you many votes in an election. It's the sort of thing that if Labour put themselves in their manifesto, we're going to do this, then that's the sort of thing that people who feel very, very strongly against it might therefore put them off voting Labour, whereas it's not something that most people feel strongly enough about that they would actually vote for a party. So I think if it's going to happen, it had to happen as a backbench way. And as you say, there's a long tradition of I think fox hunting was a backbench bill, wasn't it? Was smoking happened, the ban on smoking in pubs happened without being led by Tony Blair's government. There is a sort of long tradition in Parliament of these sorts of social changes happening in this way, and it does feel to me like the mood within the House and certainly in the country is that change is coming this time.
In practical terms, I think if the bill did pass all the stages of Parliament in the Commons and the Lords, it would become law round about the start of 2027. We don't have long. Let's hop over to Prime Minister's questions. What do you think the government is most worried about at PMQs today?
Well, I think we're going to see a sort of scattergun approach from Rishi Sunak today because there's so many things to go at. I mean, everybody's talking about the budget, and these reports that emerged last night, which are being confirmed off the record by officials, that Rachel Reeves is now talking about plugging a £40 billion hole in the budget in 2 weeks' time, which means even bigger tax hikes and welfare cuts than had been anticipated, means that the scale of what we're expecting now in a fortnight's time is really something that we haven't seen in this country for a long time. It seems pretty clear that the national insurance thing, employers' contributions, is going to happen, because why else wouldn't the government be knocking it down? And so I would imagine Rishi Sunak is going to go pretty hard on manifesto breaches. It is a bit tricky for him, this, because he himself stood on a party manifesto saying that he wouldn't raise national insurance, and then went ahead and did that when he was chancellor. So it's not the most comfortable ground for him, but I don't suppose that'll stop him from weighing in. And your favourite pop star, Taylor Swift, Sam, who I know you love talking about, once again is on front pages again today with this news that Keir Starmer actually met up with her along with his family at one of these gigs in London, which just means this story just still won't go away for the Prime Minister, and I imagine he'll have to answer questions about that, or at least some really, really corny PMQs jokes about it, if nothing else. On
the budget, I think it's worth remembering that the amount of money that George Osborne said that he needed to save in 2010 was 40 billion over 4 or 5 years. And we're right back to that amount of money being needed by a chancellor once more. Some of that is because she wants to do more spending. That's different to George Osborne. He was looking to cut spending. But you're right, not only are there the tax rises that we've been talking about, but there is cuts to the benefits bill, a clampdown on fraud, and plans to get people kind of working again. So there's lots of scope, they think, in the welfare bill, and that discussion remains live in government, and we should hear about the kind of changes they're proposing next week. And that continues to dominate the conversation behind the scenes in government, because once again there isn't a great deal that's going on in public that the government is doing and setting the agenda with today.
The other interesting thing, Sam, just to say from the latest reports on the budget, although I haven't had this bit confirmed myself, is that Rachel Reeves is also planning a significant investment in the NHS in 2 weeks' time. And that makes sense to me. If you're a chancellor who is having to release this sort of smorgasbord of misery upon the nation in 2 weeks' time and saying this tax is going up and that tax is going up and sorry we didn't tell you that we're going to do this and this is happening on welfare, you kind of need some good news in there as well, right? So why not go a little bit further with all the bad news that you're doing and raise a little bit more cash, so at least you can inject some money into what it remains. Every poll says that the country's number one priority, the NHS, and say, look, there is some gain here as well as pain. It's worth it. This isn't all for years and years and years' time to balance the books. This is also right now, right here in quote unquote our NHS, and it gives you a good news story to tell amid all the misery, and that certainly makes sense to me. I would be doing something like that if I was Chancellor.
I think I know there will be money for the NHS. There'll be money for the First Steps mission for more teachers in schools, a bit of money for house building as well, and possibly something for the MOD. But all over Whitehall, there's going to be an increase in budgets beyond, I think, the 1% that Jeremy Hunt left behind, 1% above inflation that Jeremy Hunt left behind when he was Chancellor. So more money all round, but particularly, as you say, for the NHS. That gives us 25 seconds on the Tories. What one point do you think it's worth repeating from that leadership contest?
Absolutely nothing to say about the Tories. Why don't we save it for tomorrow? There's a TV debate happening and people start voting. Sorry, Tories, we're out of time.
Taylor Swift got more time than the Tories. But then again, Downing Street do deny that it was tickets as a reward. But if you listen, that's the alarm. So we've got to stop. We will see you tomorrow morning, bright and early, for the last one of the week. Goodbye.
Thanks very much for listening. Cheers. Bye.